Welcome to episode 587 of the Barcelona podcast, brought to you by the Blue Wire Podcast Network. I'm Hilton, and he's Ruri Barlow. And it has been a few days since the Girona loss, the 4-2 loss. So today's show has quite the grab bag of different topics to get a neutral's perspective on all of that, because just like most of you listening, I was ready to move on from the Girona loss within a few hours of it being over. Nothing really good to say, so why say anything at all is generally how I would approach that. So how does all that sound, Rory?
Yeah, no, it sounds good to me. Certainly, there's always plenty to discuss with Barcelona, regardless of whether it's going well, badly. If nothing's happening, there's always something happening.
As I always say, it is a blessing and a curse as a content creator related to FC Barcelona. It's just the way it is, that even when there's no news, there's always some news. So let's at least, I know we have to talk about the Girona stuff just for a second here, because Barcelona were up 2-1 against Girona, but then over the course of 9 minutes in the second half, they were put to the sword 4-2, lost to Girona, lost second place in the table. They don't control their own destiny to get to the Spanish Super Cup, which obviously I think most clubs would kind of not care about generally from year to year, but a club with Barcelona who needs the revenue. And honestly, at this point, with Xavi getting no trophies this season and now returning next year, any opportunity for a trophy, I think, is still a big deal, even if, again, in the days of Messi, so many younger Kool-Aids have gotten used to kind of rolling their eyes at trophies. But those of us who've been around now a little bit longer, now closer to 20 years or more, then they understand that any trophy is important. Don't sleep on the Ligas because they're not guaranteed, and they certainly shouldn't be guaranteed for quite a many years now. So obviously the club desperately needs the money from the Spanish Super Cup and all that stuff. But I would ask this twofold. How concerning was that match to you? And how much do you buy into, I don't know, somebody had this big long thing about how with Real Madrid and Kylian Mbappe and the money that they have to spend, that we could see an era of dominance in the Liga like PSG in France and what Bayern Munich did in the Bundesliga. And while my heart says that that's not going to happen, it sent chills down my spine in a way that I hadn't really conceptualized in that, or Juve in Italy, I should say. And oh boy. So I know those are two different questions there, but it felt like if that was the response after the Girona match, that, oh man, this was worse than I even thought.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, frankly, from a further step back again, I feel like that has been something that's not necessarily in the pipeline, but certainly something that can or should have been considered 2 years ago or so, when Barcelona started to go into this kind of financial crisis and you saw them use the levers. And essentially, what we were talking about is if these levers don't come off, if they're not successful, then there is a possibility that Real Madrid really stretch the gap. And the levers were an attempt to close that gap sooner rather than later, and try and kind of rebuild the side and then get back to Real Madrid, as opposed to what Laporta's tried to do, and is kind of keep that gap as close as possible, and then try and kind of make up the ground in that kind of intervening time. And yeah, I mean, look, for Real Madrid, I'd say as much as Kylian Mbappe coming, obviously he's one of the best players in the world and makes a huge difference. I feel like Xabi Alonso potentially arriving in Madrid in about a year, 2 years' time is as much of a worry for Barcelona fans as anything else, because what one player does not a side make, but Xabi Alonso seems to make a side himself. So yeah, he is also a concern for Barcelona. I think it's definitely a worry, more so not necessarily just because of Real Madrid and they're doing very well in the way they're managing things, but more just because they don't seem to be able to get out of their own tailspin, and seems to be swaying from one plan to the next, seems to be swaying from one manager or from the president or from sporting director to sporting director. There's no one kind of consistent line of thought or voice at Barcelona right now, which is the macro concern. The micro concern for Girona, yeah, I mean, I think it's more of a problem in terms of kind of narrative and selling this to the fans and the players, that keeping Xavi is the right thing to do. I mean, you had Laporta and Xavi, and they certainly put on a good show of we're excited, we're happy, we've renewed our energy, and we really want to kind of keep this going. But there's holes in the discourse. We know that, we've discussed that. You've discussed that, Dan, before, and yeah, the fact that they then collapse again in the last half hour against Girona really kind of doesn't help to plug those holes in the narrative and plug the idea, or prevent the idea, that Xavi's staying is a last resort as opposed to something that's desired and wanted by all. And yeah, ultimately that Girona game, I think it was probably one of their best performances of the season up until the Sergi Roberto pass that let Girona in. But yeah, the same thing happened again. Xavi gave the same answers, and you get the same growing kind of anger from the fans and the board.
Yeah, I think we'll say the optimistic approach, if you could find one, I would say that my gut says next season. I'm not saying I'm already booting that or saying that things are going to change for Barcelona, that they won't find a way. Like last season, I think the expectations were not that they would win the Liga, and Real Madrid found ways to drop points, and Barcelona had a good enough amount of luck and defending that they were able to win the title. So I do think that next season is going to be really difficult, but I also don't want to ever. I'd say this a million times, but it's always true. I mean, the reason why it's so hard to send players packing is because they live in Barcelona with their families, and even though the even younger players, like I think around I always bring the NBA up and people yell at me that I talk too much about basketball, but there are certain places in the NBA that are always going to be destinations based on where they are. Like the Miami Heat, even if they're having down seasons, players just want to live in Miami. And I don't want to talk about the taxes in Miami, but also Messi does live in Inter Miami. And there are things about that you can start to connect the dots financially about those things behind the scenes. And those are real things. I mean, that's how the players are people and agents and and families. So Barcelona will always be a destination. Real Madrid will always be a destination, of course. I mean, for all of its acumen. And even if Real Madrid, I think they've always kind of been a bigger destination than Barcelona, which is unfortunate to admit, but they are. But I think, again, Barcelona, no offense to Borussia Dortmund or RB Leipzig, and of course, Bayer Leverkusen did what they did this season in an unprecedented way, but they historically were not a club that was contending, of course, in the Bundesliga. So in Germany, it's the players want to get to Bayern Munich. That is where they're going. And PSG, they're obviously financially just buying up the rest of their opponents. And so I think because Barcelona will continue to be a destination, that even if very much like, what was it, last decade? I guess you could say last decade, that Real Madrid was in the Liga at least. They conceded a few titles to Barcelona. Barcelona won more titles last decade than Real Madrid did. And I could easily see that this decade, that again, Barcelona already have one, and now Real Madrid have more. But I could see now Real Madrid winning the majority of the titles as opposed to Barcelona in the Liga, and that is just the ebbs and flows of that swing. But I think the idea of this permanence of Real Madrid dominating La Liga for the next 10 years or whatever, 12 years, that is of course very premature. Now, of course, if Barcelona navigate another potential global pandemic the same way they navigated the first one, then yeah, that's more trouble along the way. But speaking of the Girona match again, as we try to put a cap on that, I found that it was so hard to watch in that second half because the whole back line was poor. And they have been, and it should be, this is not just a Barcelona thing, but many teams, if you have one backline player not necessarily doing his full job, then he is an issue, but the rest of them can kind of pick up the pieces. But this was the worst we've seen, I think, from both Koundé and Kubarsi in months, both individually. And then you combine that with Cancelo. He was ball watching again, which at this point is just a broken record, no surprises. So he was ball watching. And then Araujo also still struggling. He didn't have his best match either. So you combine that all with, as you mentioned, that mistake from Roberto on the pass to Dovbyk. It's 2-2. Girona's at home. All that momentum. And a reminder, too, as they were celebrating in the postgame, Barcelona, I know the players are fighting for the Spanish Super Cup because the club needs money. I mean, what kind of, again, what is the I know they want to have, you fight for the badge, you fight for the crest and all that stuff, but Girona were fighting for a spot in the Champions League for the first time in their history. And many of those players, it's funny because Girona players are all tied to leaving the club, but if they're in the Champions League next season, why wouldn't Girona in that City group want to try to keep as many of those players as possible? Because that squad in Girona they were barely deep enough to keep their Champions League spot because of, again, we're drop points and all those things. So the idea that they have to then add European competition in the Champions League to that means that this squad needs to basically stay the same and bolster it up, or Girona's in a whole heaping amount of trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, like you say, Girona are playing for the Champions League for the first time. They could potentially finish above Barcelona. This is just kind of their fourth season in La Liga. This is a season of a lifetime. And you look at the way Porto, who scored the goals there, returns, having been relegated with them before, strikes the volley of a lifetime against Barcelona.
Oh yeah,
I mean, they had nothing to lose, and yeah, you kind of see that in the way that they play. They don't have anything to lose, and Michel has made that clear to his side, and that's why you get such a vast difference between Barcelona, who seem to always play as if they have everything to lose, whereas other sides, Girona in this case, seem to be very much aware that they can win things as opposed to the other side of it. And And yeah, I think for Xavi, the main issue is you mentioned the defense there, is that the one thing you could say about Barcelona last season is that as soon as it hit about October time, when they kind of went for the more defensive shape, they went for the fourth midfielder. Because they started off that season scoring a lot of goals. I think a lot of people forget that, but then they did shift, and there was a clear plan. Everybody knew that what they were doing. They knew exactly how they were trying to win games. They knew their flaws. They knew their strengths, and they played to those. Whereas this season, still at this point in the season, I'm not quite exactly sure, or it's not clear on the pitch exactly what they're trying to do. It seems that some weeks they're trying to do one thing. It seems that others, against PSG, they're trying to go more vertical. Some games, in this game, they tried to control the ball a lot more. And yeah, that constant kind of flip flopping is, when you go kind of a goal down, or when you concede that silly goal against Girona, and you need to just kind of see it out for 10 minutes, you need to have that mechanism, the automatismos, which is a long gone kind of fashionable word that was around in the Guardiola era. But yeah, that kind of automatic, right, this is where the ball goes, this is what happens, I can do this without thinking. That's not there for Barcelona right now. And I think, yeah, that's the one, or the primary thing that I want to see from Xavi next season going forward.
Yeah, I'm going to put you on the spot here a little bit. This, again, is a macro question more than just talking about Girona. But if you had to pick one, because it's, of course, all three of these things, but if you had to pick one, do you think the present issue with Barcelona as they end out the rest of the season, do you think it's a mentality problem? Do you think it's a coaching problem? Or do you think it's a personnel problem?
That is a good question. I'd say it has to go down to coaching, because I mean, we can say mentality, and that's been the thing that's thrown against Barcelona for the last 5-6 years, especially in Europe. But I mean, they got to the quarterfinals and they were doing pretty well until that Araujo red card. Um, and last season, we saw them come through a lot of these games. We saw them come through tight games against Real Madrid. We saw them hold out with basically no possession at the Bernabeu, which, for a side that's mentally weak, that's not something that usually happens. We saw them win that game 2-1 as well, where they didn't necessarily have all of the games. So we've seen them have that mentality in the past. What we've seen this season is a team that doesn't seem to be as focused. I mean, Ronald Araujo, I think, is the prime suspect there, in the sense that
Mm-hmm.
we've seen how high his ceiling is, how good he can be. And this year, that concentration's not been there. He's been sloppy at times. He's been kind of overeager to commit, and just not playing with the kind of tranquility that we've seen in the past. And ultimately, that kind of has to go down to the coaching, because it's up to Xavi to ensure that his players are comfortable. It's up to him to ensure that they know exactly where the ball should go when, and ensure that they know exactly their duties. So I think, more than anything, I mean, the personnel, the injuries have had a huge impact this season. I think that's something that can't be underplayed, and it's a frustrating kind of excuse in a sense, because nobody can say what would have happened, and nobody can say, right, well, that's kind of this person's fault, and yeah, okay, we can maybe replace the fitness department, but is that really going to help? We never know. Injury is partly down to chance. So yeah, that's a frustrating excuse. I think if you're going to point to one area out of those three where that's the thing that can be fixed or improved most, it has to be the coaching for me.
Yeah, I find for the personnel thing, I've made the excuses, but you can only make so many excuses over the course of a season. But I think that obviously losing Busquets last season, and as I've said, the loss of the two things that Busquets did at such a high level, even last season, is as a ball playing pivot and as a coordinator and setter up, if you want to call it, of the rest defense that allowed Barcelona to keep pressure up high and turn their opponent over a lot higher. So there was, even though Busquets once they were obviously running 70 yards to try to defend a counter, things were ugly and he got a lot of criticism. But it's the number of times that the other team never got to that counter because he was in the right positions or set up everyone else in the right positions to hold that ball in. And you're just not seeing that. It feels like this season, any opposition team has figured out the ways through quickly to not turn the ball back over in their own half and get the other way. And we did see that even from Girona. I mean, when that game opened up and Porto just went crazy, there's just too much space for him. And of course, Cancelo and his positioning has something to do with that and the way that they're set up. But also, if you have a ball playing center pivot, I should say, things are just a bit different, and you don't have to push Christensen forward in the same position that Cancelo is also getting forward, while Kubarsi is reactive and stepping forward, and now everyone's just forward. And I think as we transition to talking about the rumor mill, and of course, silly season has begun after Girona, and talking about a few different players, both in Barcelona's world and outside, that they would like to incorporate in. I find that the positions do make sense, the one that keep coming up, like left wing, where it's funny because I think Rafinha had possibly a better season than he had last season, and he played more than half of this year playing out of position on the left wing. And then you have, I mean, Koundé just this year kind of sticking with right back instead of having it be a bit weird. I felt the last 6 months, he clearly has been arguably one of the best right backs in world football, and kind of committing to that idea. And then, of course, while Christensen in that unbeaten streak did settle the defensive midfielder position for Barcelona, as I'm saying this all along, that it's not, I'm not even saying it's Barca DNA or something, but the Barcelona players and the way that this team is constructed, having a ball winner like a Xavi, like a Gabi, I should say Xavi, but like a Gabi, who might be coming back again in the fall, hopefully at a good level. This team does need a pivot who can kind of play deeper and spray balls forward and do that job that not Busquets, but I mean, and not Rodri. Nobody's Rodri, but that kind of player. It just suits. It's not even a style. It's just some teams are built to play that kind of style with the ball, and Barcelona are a team that's like that. So it's not just a dogmatic Barcelona thing. It's like this team would be better with a ball playing center back who fundamentally understands how to pressure teams in their own third. And I think those are the bare minimum requirements of what this team would expect from hey, we're starting this ball winning pivot. That is our player that we're starting game in and game out. So that's what I'm talking about there. But I think those ideas about a left winger and a pivot and potentially a left back, if Cancelo's not sticking around, that'll come up here. But let's start with Vitor Roque up on the front line, because this nonsense has launched into overdrive since I talked about a possible loan last week. I said, oh, yeah, maybe he'll go down on loan, whatever. But I had also mentioned last week that with his agent, Andre Curry, he had been a former Brazilian scout for Barcelona, so it seemed okay, but he's also put himself in the papers in the past, and he's a bit outspoken. So he did this week say pretty clearly about possibly looking for a permanent transfer, and said that Xavi has not really communicated with the player, which the club then denied. So Xavi, it seems like, is opting for a loan next season, I guess, which I talked about it last week. So I'm not going to rehash what financially that means for the club, as in you poured potentially all this money, but you guaranteed 35 mil on this player that might play half a season for the club. That's obviously awful. That's absurd. That's terrible, especially when you have a left wing that you need to fill and a pivot that you need to fill and other positions you need to fill to reinforce the squad, including a backup left back and all that. But the drama in the papers with a signing that wasn't even supposed to arrive until the summer, at this point in the year, I mean, again, that's just drama Lona for you. That's terrible. So to me, it appears that Xavi and Deco, though, from the outside, are not totally aligned on the vision for the squad, which is why Vitor Roque was brought in. And, again, it's while they have different agents, it seems like Estevao, Willian, or Messinho is going to Chelsea. So it's one of those where even if Vitor Roque, and we know that these Brazilian commissions have a lot to do with, scratch my back now and you'll get something later, but I mean, what are they getting later for this, right? Is it just a failed Brazilian 19-year-old who, again, I was happy with what he could bring, but he was going to take some time. And it's so frustrating because it seems like the club and Xavi, even with Xavi staying for one more year now, it seems like the club and Xavi and nobody has any patience for him. And the agent in his camp seemed to have the least amount of patience at all. And that's just frustrating. Like, why make that move in the first place? I mean, obviously it's for the money, it's the number, but I know I'm answering my own questions, Rory, but I'm just frustrated. Yeah, ease my frustration, or don't, or lean into it.
No, I think you're perfectly right with what you say there, and part of it's political. I mean, Xavi, from you learn to. I mean, Dan, you're an expert at this point, but yeah, apologies for the Spanish builders in the background who always have impeccable timing.
No, it makes it authentic. It makes it authentic. In Spain,
the real sound of Spain, that is. But yeah, so yeah, I think with Vitor Roque, you learn to read between the lines a little bit in terms of what's coming out, what's coming through the papers, and as much as they can be unreliable, they do tend to give you kind of a shape and a feeling of what things are like. And Vitor Roque, maybe Xavi likes him as a player, but he wasn't his signing. He certainly wasn't his priority for the January transfer window, and probably wouldn't have been his priority for this window. I mean, for me, I think it's the signing of Vitor Roque is not necessarily a bad one, but yeah, it's that allocation of resources, the fact that clearly this is a Deco inspired signing. I mean, Deco is the Brazilian in the room here with Andre Curry. And does Joan Laporte have a strong view on Vitor Roque? I don't think it's necessarily his signing either. So yeah, that's an influencing factor, and especially when there's just so many holes in this Barcelona side, it's very easy to see why people are frustrated, why Xavi is frustrated. And yeah, Vitor Roque, come the age of 26, 27, might be the best number 9 in the world.
Right.
But yeah, 8 years is a long time to kind of give one of those players or that you bring in, and results are going to be expected of him. I think Xavi hasn't done him any favours. He could have played him more. He could have given him more minutes, especially when you look at the way Marc Guiu started that game in Mallorca. That's certainly a red flag, one way or another, whether Xavi doesn't think he's ready enough to start ahead of Marc Guiu, or whether it's more of a political move. But yeah, it's a problem for Barcelona. And Curry's comments were incendiary, to say the least. He's going to meet with Deco in the next few weeks, I think, and they'll thrash it out one way or another. I kind of see him staying. I think the one kind of influencing factor is that that 5 million that's due to come out of his kind of transfer fee and the salary limit. That's maybe something that the club are looking at and thinking, yeah, maybe we could use that 5 million elsewhere for this year and then have him back. But yeah, I see him either staying or maybe he gets a loan move. But yeah, I think it's more politics. I think it's actually probably very little to do with Roque himself, which is kind of unfortunate because he's the one that's caught in the crossfire.
Yeah, one of my regular longtime listeners, Dirk Powers, kind of wrote me this about why aren't more people talking about the idea that if he plays too much or whatever the percentage is in that contract, that Barcelona have to pay that extra thing. And as you know, when you're in a pinch like this, you'll see. I mean, you see this across all sports when those have those guaranteed minutes and restrictions and things. And if I remember right, somebody can correct me on this, but Thiago Alcantara had this in his contract originally. So this is actually one of the things that allowed Pep Guardiola to get in his ear to bring him to Bayern Munich in the first place, because there was like a minimum, and there have been other players. I believe Ibrahim Afellay had it as well, like years and years and years ago, but he also got injured, so it didn't really matter. So they like threw him on at the last, so they wouldn't have to pay it because he had to play like a minima. These things are, we just hear them in hearsay after the fact, and of course with social media nowadays, things are just compounded upon more and more and more. So I don't need social media to tell you about this next one, though. Sergio Roberto looks like he'll be sticking around next year. They just have to figure out the terms. The 32-year-old made 21 appearances this season as, constant issued apologies were spreading around from him because he is the main captain, like the one after Girona. And it seems like he's now asking for a 2-year deal while the club wants a 1 year, which likely means that they will agree on a 1+1 year option for their 32-year-old captain. I've gone on record before in saying, not to say I don't have the care for this, but he made 21 appearances and he does a job against a certain level of opponent across league in Spain. And again, it is helpful that he's Catalan, and he, as young players have said, he's a pretty calming force in the locker room to get the players accustomed to the team. And just having a locker room player like that, I think, is useful. When I say versatile, we know what he is, versatile. And it'd be great if next season he made 14 appearances, right? Or 13 appearances, because Gavi and Pedri, and who knows if Dion will be around, stay healthy and a pivot is added. And you don't really need him, but he is more of a figurehead to just be around the locker room and help players. And I always heard that, this is a bit spicy here, Ruri, but I had heard in his younger days that he was pretty good, very much like Piqué and Ricky Puig. He was pretty adept at the night scene, but of course now he's older and he's a family man and he's settled down, which, again, who hasn't in Spain with things going on in Barcelona? But basically living both of that, knowing what it was like to be a young player, kind of on the top of the world, playing with Pep Guardiola's teams, and now again settled down and gone through his lumps as a captain and gone through the we'll say some of the dark periods compared to his early years as a young player. And so I don't mind this move. Again, Barcelona, they only registered 21 first-team players this year. And I know they played Cubarsí and Lamine Yamal, but Cubarsí wasn't part of the original plans. I don't know if Lamine Yamal was either, but they really only had like 23 first-team players, counting Lamine Yamal and Cubarsí. And next season, it's not a bad idea for them to fill out a 25-person roster or squad chart and have 25 players. Like, it's not a bad thing. And if Sergio Roberto is making 14 appearances as your 22nd or 23rd or 24th player, that's fine. But if you have so many injuries that like now he becomes your 14th player or 13th player, now that's a lot more concerning.
Yeah, and I think you look into the alternatives, like as you say, I think Sergio Roberto likes to get kind of held up as this kind of flagpole of kind of complaints for a lot of other things that are going on at Barcelona, whether that be poor recruitment or whether that be kind of a lenient attitude or in terms of mentality. He basically whatever kind of view or narrative you want to convey onto Barcelona, Sergio Roberto is the perfect kind of conductor for that. And so, yeah, I think he's a minor issue essentially, and the fact that they have. I mean, this is a side that's dipped into the academy so much lately that they keep getting younger and younger. And yeah, Gavi, Fermin Lopez, Pedro is obviously not academy product, but yeah, they are using the academy a lot. And at some point, you're not going to have an ex midfielder up, and so to have Sergio Roberto around just to fill in those gaps, I think, as you say, and I mean, yeah, okay, cost them against Girona. And he will cost them against bigger teams if he's in the lineup because we've seen that he struggles at that level, at least for kind of from the start. But I mean, he also won them points against San Maria. He did good things this season as well during his appearances. I think if you actually evaluate his performances this year, he's not performed badly, but that Girona mistake will always kind of come back to haunt him. And yeah, I think he's, like you say, he's a very minor issue in this Barcelona side. And maybe you can throw, I don't know, Marc Bernal or Unai Hernandez in there. But yeah, do you really want to play them alongside a De Jong and Fermin Lopez? I mean, Fermin's still very inexperienced. De Jong, as we know, isn't necessarily always the most switched on at times, especially when the ball isn't at his feet. So yeah, you stick Sergio Roberto in, you know exactly what you're going to get, for better or for worse. And sometimes you don't need to kind of throw in a 17-year-old because eventually you will pay the price for that. And I think even with Cubarsí, who brilliant talent, but looked 17 in the last couple of weeks, and that's fine. That's absolutely okay. But if you have three of those in there and three of them decide to look 17 all at the same time, then that becomes a bit more of a problem.
Yeah, funny. I would find that if you made an argument to me that Roberto is more positionally reliable than De Jong, I think that is a fair argument. But I don't think Sergio Roberto, by and large, makes you better, and you can't use him.
No, that's very true.
Right, exactly. So it's funny you mentioned Pau Cubarsí because here's kind of again another non-story, but a good story because Barcelona fans need some good news. Contract renewal seems like it is imminent. I don't think it was ever in doubt that he'd be sticking around, but the negotiations have gone really well, and it should be closed by this week. And that's just done and dusted. He'll likely, I think, I would expect to get a €1 billion release clause, as Spanish teams kind of have to do to ward off now the unspeakable money elsewhere in other leagues. So unless you have a big zag for me about how Barcelona should reconsider their Cubarsí extension, I think I don't really know this is much of a story.
No, there are some things that happen at Barcelona that aren't controversial in this one. We can put that in that column.
All right, so let's actually make things now more controversial, or let's take a visit, Rory, to fantasy land or to dreamland or whatever you want to call it, because this week Kool-Aid's got to engage in a nonsense debate, as I like to say, about Nico Williams or Dani Olmo, or both. I don't know. What are we doing here? So Olmo has a release clause of €60 million, and Williams has a €50 million release clause, having just signed the extension, which is important. I would say it's actually important, but also less important because he's a Basque player, and they often do that with the intention to leave or not leave the club, and that way Athletic Club gets some money out of any potential move. So a lot of the loyalty from that is even if they have a foot out the door, and they've been doing this for decades and decades now, going back to the days of Beccaro and Chichi Bajirstein. So it's been a long time that Bass players have done this. But let's put the money aside for a second. Because 60 and 50, I don't know what we're talking about here. We're going to pretend that Barcelona could sign one this summer because we'll get to the Nike deal. But let's say that deal is astronomical, like we'll get into. So do either of those options excite you more than the other? And you would say, hey, if Barca can make that signing, I would be actually more excited about their opportunities next season to contend for the Liga title and all that stuff?
That's a good question. They're both fantastic players, and I mean, you see the way that Nico Williams operates Athletic Club and the damage he's done to so many sides this year. I think for me, the one kind of defining factor, and there's two actually. There's two factors. I'll give you the two boring answers, and then I'll give you some more fun ones. The one factor for me is Dani Olmo's injury record isn't perfect. It's not squeaky clean, whereas Nico Williams has managed to stay fit of late, and that would probably push me more into Nico Williams. And Nico is younger as well. He's probably a harder type of well, I don't know about that. I was going to say it's a harder type of talent to find it, but actually, Olmo is pretty unique in the way that he manages to combine his talent. But also, the other one thing is that Xavi system is what is Xavi going to do with these players, or what are Barcelona going to do with these players going forward? I'd say Nico Williams is a more versatile player in that sense, in the sense that every manager is going to find a use for him. Every manager is going to be able to use him and utilize him pretty well. Or should be able to, at least at Barcelona's level. And Dani Olmo probably more fits a certain type of style. And Dani Olmo, you want to have more of the ball, even though he's gone to RB Leipzig, which they are the counter-attackers extraordinaires. And so that's probably been good for this game as well, in a sense. But yeah, Olmo is a bit of he's quite a kind of fetishized player for me. Like he's very fun to watch. He invents things. He makes things happen. He sees things that a lot of players do not see. So yeah, he's probably the one that would excite me a touch more. But I mean, both of those are dream signings for Barcelona at this point. I think Nico Williams is one of my favorite players in terms of personality. Probably one of my favorite players in Spain as well.
I would say if we're talking about transfer rumors and stuff about Barcelona, Rory, I think those gentlemen outside might be Florentino Perez's men.
They work for the construction company.
Yeah, so why don't we throw out a few other names that maybe Real Madrid would want to poach that aren't necessarily great players. Maybe even some retired players we can throw out there that, this player is available. But anyway, so I don't really have much to add on that. I totally agree with the sentiment and the priority of where that should go. I think, to me, of what I've always seen of Dani Olmo, strap in. I think people are going to be upset about this, but I think he is what Ferran Torres could be. I think that is what Dani Olmo is. Is he a center forward? Yes and no. Is he a left winger? Yes and no. Is he attacking midfielder? Yes and no. But everything he does when he puts an imprint on a game, it attracts attention. And when you have a team that is kind of built to get the best of his attacking services, like RB Leipzig is, then you see what Dani Olmo is. And my concern is kind of like the Antoine Griezmann thing, where Dani Olmo, yes, he came from the academy and all that stuff, but what happens if it doesn't all fit? And what do you do when you paid $60 million for something that doesn't necessarily all work with Lewandowski or something like that? And to your point about Nico Williams, he's a left winger. I mean, and he's something that Barcelona needs, where Balde, who's much better defensively than Cancelo and really struggled getting that final third, all Balde has to do is learn that second ball back to Nico Williams, and he's a player on the left wing that can go 1v1 for Barcelona. And I mean, it was David Villa, the last guy who could do that. I mean, Thierry Henry, I can't. I mean, Alexis Sanchez wasn't.
You are missing out Neymar. To be fair to Neymar.
Sorry. I have literally in my notes for the next guy is the Norwegian Neymar, and it's literally written in my notes there. But yes, so aside from Neymar, all right, you got me on that. But aside from Neymar, I don't know how many times Barcelona have even had a left winger. And also in world football, left wingers is a bit tougher to fill in as a 1v1 option, where you see a lot more 1v1 right wingers, just because that's the nature of the number of right-footed players as opposed to left-footed players. But yeah, I think Nico, I'd be excited about Nico. I think he solves problems for Barcelona. I think you see the connection he has with Lamine Yamal personally off the field as well. I think he would immediately fit into that locker room, and I would be very excited about him. We're going to talk about another guy later, but I would say that if Barcelona had, I don't know how they would do this, but if they had 85 million to spend and they wound up spending that on Zubimendi and Nico Williams, I think I'd call that a perfect transfer window to me. Okay, speaking of the Norwegian Neymar, there was also a link to 19-year-old Club Brugge winger Antonio Nusa, who could be bought for 17 million, but I really think we're this an example of an agent attaching his name to Barcelona to drive up the price a little bit. He was a youngster who people have known about since he broke into Club Brugge's first team at 17. I've seen him about 3 times, and I feel like he's a risk. He's a really promising player, but he's the kind of risk that an EPL team will pay much larger bucks for than what Barcelona would be willing to spend on him. So I think this story is kind of a non-story, even though it kind of caught fire a little bit to, I guess, make culés happy about the fact that, Barcelona is scouting these young promising prospects as well that could potentially play on the left wing.
Yeah, I mean, I've not actually checked who his agent is, but unless he has an agent with very good connections at Barcelona, then I'd say it's quite unlikely that it happens. I mean, yeah, he has a lovely highlights package. I can't profess to have watched too much of him, but we speak about the kind of the resources, the lack of resources. If you're going to use them on somebody, better to use it on, like you say, kind of two proven players or two kind of known quantities, as opposed to 3 or 4 unknown quantities. I'd kind of point towards the direction of Noah Lang, who's a player that I really like, fantastic player, really fun to watch and whatnot. But he did what more than Noos has done so far in the Belgian league and then in the Netherlands, and hasn't quite broken out into the world of football as a world superstar yet. So yeah, I'd probably put the brakes on that, and you probably aren't too far away from the truth of your assessment.
All right, so the next one, we're going to go back to Barcelona Universe, a decision that needs to be made this week, which is not always reliable on matters of Barcelona, obviously not. Discuss another loan next season for Ansu Fati, this time to Sevilla. And you know what, Ruri? Another loan for Ansu Fati, but to Sevilla next season. I don't hate that move at all because he grew up in Sevilla. Looking at Sevilla's loan option or wing options and play and financial perspective of like needing to take players on loan, I think he gets way more run than he did at Brighton, where so far this season he's played 21% of all possible minutes, 4 goals and 1 assist in 976 minutes, almost 1,000 minutes, playing mainly as an attacking midfielder with some movement on the left and through the middle. But he's played just 27 Premier League minutes since March the 10th, including he didn't play in 4 matches in the last 3, and he stayed on the bench for those. So I think they were concerned about him at Brighton and the depth that kind of squad have, the expectation that they had, and it didn't work out. And not say that anyone is surprised that it was a failed loan, but Ansu Fati, as people know, I'm not going to give up on him. I will until the day that he permanently transfers outside of Barcelona. I will not give up on Ansu Fati. He is not who he was before the injuries. That is clear to see, but because he's a finisher. And from a dead standstill, the way he can still finish, the way he can strike a ball, you cannot teach those things. And I think confidence for him is obviously, could it be worse? And so if he's able to find some confidence, I am fully endorsing the fact that I think Sevilla on loan next season would be the right move for him.
Yeah, I think the one incognito, as they like to say in Spain, is perhaps that Jorge Mendes has him back at Barcelona and trying to kind of up his value again because it has taken such a hit. You look at, I think it will be one of Joao Felix or Ansu Fati is probably back there next season.
Who would you take?
Which out of the two, I'd probably take Joao Felix, to be honest. I think which is an unpopular answer. I don't particularly think Joao Felix should go back to Barcelona. But if you're talking about, even just if you want to win those games against Atleti, perhaps he's the right choice. But yeah, so I think with Joao Felix, you get a player who's inconsistent but does have quality. And as much as I think it's been a disappointing season for them, does have 16 goal contributions this year. Ansu Fati, I think you won't get more of him until you get more of him, in the sense that until he's playing regularly, you're going to struggle to get the best Ansu Fati back. So better to have him playing every week somewhere else as opposed to contributing, even if it's good contributions at Barcelona. Sevilla, it's in theory a very good move. The one doubt I have about it is that Sevilla have been dreadfully run of late. Yeah. The chaos at the club is sprawling, and there's no kind of certainty over who the manager is going to be, what players are going to be there. You look at the loan move they did for Hannibal Mejbri, the Manchester United midfielder. He's basically not played. Kind of seems to not be a Quique Sanchez Flores signing as opposed to a Victor Orta signing. So yeah, I would be more tempted to steer him clear of that chaos until I kind of had a good read on where Sevilla are going and what they're kind of doing this summer. If you get the right manager in there and it's somebody that you can kind of trust with Fati, then I'd say, yeah, go on, send him to Sevilla. If not, send him to Osasuna. Send him somewhere where you know that they have a structure in place, like they did with Ez Abde. Somebody where the manager is going to make sure that they're doing their job and won't play them otherwise. Someone that can kind of grab a hold of them. And I'm not saying that Fati is necessarily indisciplined or kind of, the wrong player in that sense. But a manager that knows how to take care of young players and is not going to kind of sugarcoat things, I think, is probably right for Ansu right now. And Hugo Barasate is off; he's not going to be at Osasuna next season. But yeah, one of those sides that will make full use of him. Maybe even, I mean, Alaves are a much more kind of without the ball team, but if Luis Garcia Plaza sticks around there, you look at what he's done with Samuel Morodion this season on loan from Atleti. Hasn't played him all the time, but has got a lot out of him and got a lot more out of Samu than perhaps people expected. So yeah, I think find the right manager, somebody that's going to take care of him and going to play him, and that's where you go with Ansu Fati.
Yeah, I was actually going to offer up Mallorca. I was going to ask you your suggestions, and I like Osuna. And yeah, a club like a Mallorca where he could potentially be a central figure, because I kind of need him to be a central figure to stay up in the Liga next season, because Mallorca, surprising that they would be a Liga team again, and they just get enough points. And in Ansu Fati, you need him to get enough goals and assists so that they can get enough points, and it winds up working out. And they only have so many options in January as well. So by January, and I know it seems like, again, Jorge Mendes is like, oh, I'm going to send my client to Mallorca, but if you want him to recoup his value, that's the way to do it. On the other side of the spectrum, we're going, again, back one-way ticket to well, I guess a round trip, because we're going to end with a little bit of sense. But so a round trip ticket back to fantasy land. Xavi Simons, I'll say it for you, get real. He's on loan at RB Leipzig from PSG. It would have to be a loan, of course. I think PSG is not going to part with him for more than 100 million euros, which is absurd. So I'd be really surprised that even if a loan happens, because I think this is going to be a paid loan. But that said, if he does push for the move and want to come back to Spain, the 21-year-old has 9 goals, 15 assists in 42 matches this season for RB Leipzig, mainly playing as an inverted winger, but jumping between the right and the left. And I think that versatility added to that product is, I sense with Dani Olmo, but I'll say the same thing with Simons, that it is an upgrade on the theory of Ferran Torres, that a guy who is very versatile can play in a bunch of different attacking positions to support a center striker, to support Lamine Yamal as the option on the left wing, or through the middle, and honestly also be an upgrade to the position that Fermin Lopez. This is not taking away from Fermin Lopez, but Xavi Simons is a much more proven product, of course, leading the PSV and the Dutch league in scoring last season. So he's already shown that he is in waiting as a star, potential superstar. That's why PSG wanted to get an investment on him and make sure that he was in their world to even sell on if they didn't have somebody in. But I could also see PSG losing Mbappe and saying, hey, Xavi Simons, here's the keys to the castle. So, it's interesting that this came up where I feel like, yeah, why is RB Leipzig? Why would they not be pushing to have him return if PSG want to loan him again and paying for that loan? And again, PSG, I could see them saying, all right, Mbappe's gone. We're going to need, you could be a future superstar. And we know that the marketing of Xavi Simons has, obviously Barcelona fans always raise their eyebrows a little bit because he's been famous since he was 12 years old. And, it's a lot to put on a player, but he didn't crumble under the pressure. He's been a good professional and he's never gotten in trouble. And I think he's a player that has become more and more exciting the older he gets, because not that he's fulfilling any potential prophecy of what he was supposed to be, a prodigy, but he was supposed to be this, amazing midfielder, whatever. But no, he's become a forward. He reinvented himself and has made the right moves in his career to be a good professional. So I'd be excited about Xavi Simons, but I find that the idea that he's getting a Barcelona uniform next season, I put it at less than 5%.
Yeah, I think the big issue is probably going to be Luis Enrique, who, yeah, you lose Mbappe, you look at the contributions he had from Marco Asensio in the Champions League, you look at what he had from Kang-Jin Lee, who player I really quite like, but Xavi Simons gives you more than them for me. Va sobrado is kind of the phrase that springs to mind in Spanish, and the fact that he's got more than enough talent to kind of make use of the opportunities he gets, and especially I think the one thing, if he were to arrive at Barcelona, you point to that performance he had against Real Madrid at the Bernabeu, and yes, okay, Leipzig didn't manage to overturn that tie, but Xavi Simons together with Olmo, they were running things for Leipzig, absolutely causing havoc for Real Madrid, and it was a poor Real Madrid performance at the time, but Simon's ability to receive the ball in between the lines and to find space, to use that space very well and to move the ball quickly, it's something that Barcelona don't necessarily have right now. Gundogan's probably maybe the closest, but doesn't quite have the pace or the ability to beat his man as much. Pedri, in theory, is a player that could do that, but yeah, unreliable at this point. Simons is yeah, he'd be a fantastic recruit, I think. And I think if he were to play, then he'd play a similar role to the one that Olmo would play at Barcelona. But yeah, perhaps yeah, I just see Luis Enrique looking at Siemens and being like, yeah, I can really do stuff with this guy.
Yeah, right. And I think it's a PSG factor that because let's say that he pushed for a move on loan, and instead of having to make me say João Felix or Ansu Fati, there is this happy world where I get to say João Felix or Xavi Simons, and I can't scream Xavi Simons' name loud enough. If those are the two options on loan next season, but I don't think that's not how the world works, of course. So the last little transfer thing here: Guido Rodriguez of Real Betis and Martin Zubimendi of Real Sociedad. Those two names feel like reality versus a dream. Zubimendi has a 60 million euro release clause and doesn't seem like he wants to leave Real Sociedad. And then Guido Rodriguez is a free agent. So, I mean, I guess the question I'm going to ask you, instead of asking about Martin Zubimendi and reminding me that he's a good player, does Guido Rodriguez solve a single problem for Barcelona next season for you?
Yeah, I actually think he'd start this season if he was playing for Barcelona, because I think, I mean, you saw Xavi tried with Oriol Romeu and it didn't quite work out, and fitness issues, whatever. Xavi has denied that it's to do with confidence, but essentially that didn't go right. Whereas you stick Guido Rodriguez in there, I think Barcelona have a much more balanced midfield this season than they would. And I think we spoke about this, the De Jong, Gundogan, Pedri kind of conundrum, or Gavi if you want to add him in as well there. There's just not that balance. Whereas Guido, at least he does give you that balance. And maybe he's not quite at the level, but I'm always of the opinion that you're better off finding a better fit for the side and a better kind of balance of players than you are necessarily finding the best players. I mean, you could you look at kind of Real Madrid and the way they're doing things, and yeah, sadly for Barcelona fans, that is kind of the example right now. But the balance of players that they managed to fit in is pretty impressive, as opposed to just going for necessarily. These players are great. Let's throw them all in together. Let's find the ones that balance themselves out perfectly. I think Guido would give them a lot more of that. I think if you stick him alongside De Jong, that would work quite well. I think if you have Gundogan next to him, that would work quite well. The one thing is build out from the back is not necessarily the best, but with Guido, he's Argentine. He's played in a World Cup winning side. He's been through the bad years at Argentina, where yeah, there was a lot of abuse. There's playing for Argentina, I think, is much more pressure than I think it is for playing for Barcelona, almost at least before the World Cup win.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I think he's well used to that, and he's not afraid to kind of get stuck in the trenches, which is not something that Barcelona often have loads of. So I think he would be useful. I think if they do get him in, maybe he doesn't start, but I think he could be really, really useful for them.
Yeah, I've always liked. I think he just puts in solid performances for Real Betis, and very rarely am I saying, well, there was that match a few seasons ago where Messi absolutely, well, he did this to a lot of players, but you kind of squint, you went, oh no, but no other team in the league has Messi doing that to anybody, still or since. Last thing, Barcelona hope to close a deal with Nike this month. Seems like they're advancing negotiations to, now, of course, this is hearsay, but to make the Barcelona shirt the highest paid shirt on the market. So the new contract would be involving a signing bonus, an increase in the fixed low per year, and also advantages in online selling and manufacturing with, I would hope, additional global manufacturing for certain products and things. So like for myself, you're going to see it's coming in a few weeks. So shout out Emil for helping with this. My one of my regular hosts, he helped me get one of those ones that are only available in the Barcelona store, and he shipped it to me. And for the fact that I have to go through those hoops, but so if Nike were able to rectify some of that stuff, that would be cool. But again, everything always seems from the financial stuff and the agreements doom and gloom at Barcelona. But if they were to pull this off, I know people haven't loved the Nike shirts, some of the ones in recent seasons, but if Barcelona were to pull this off and agree with this deal and have been able to use their own manufacturing and the Puma deal as leverage. I mean, that's how business works. Like by using that as leverage, bringing this up in the news, as I brought this up before, there was still years on the contract for Nike. So for them to be able to renegotiate, close this agreement now, and potentially have kind of played 3D chess with Nike and get the better of this agreement for financial purposes, I think that is a huge feather in their cap. It feels too good to be true, because you always in negotiations have to give something up. What is it they're giving up, or what, did they lose this negotiation? But hey, if they won this, that is a huge win, and it cannot be understated what this financially does for them next season in any way. That it does, I know people are going to shorthand it on social media, like, Barca are back, or financially all the financial issues are solved. That's not how that works. I've said that it's going to be at least a year after the renovated stadium is open, and I think Barcelona is still about 2.5, 3 years away from completely stabilizing financially. But this kind of move would go a long way in doing that. So I don't want to count my chickens before they hatch, but I don't. Do you sniff something like positive for Barcelona, or do you think that there is a negative spin to be taken on this?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with you, to be honest. It's that thing with Barcelona. You're just always waiting for the catch to appear, or the kind of sting in the tail to come around the corner. You don't quite know what it's going to be, but yeah, so far it looks quite a good deal for them. And yeah, as much as we like to, it's easier for us to kind of like beat Barcelona down, or beat Juan Laporta down more accurately, with the decisions that he makes poorly. But if he does manage to pull this off, then it does look like a good deal. And yeah, you do miss some of the, because of such a kind of sporting turmoil, or on the pitch, things have been so chaotic in the last 3 years. It just going from different manager to Xavi, to different system, to different sporting director. Off the pitch, they have struck some good deals, and on it too. I mean, some of their signings have been very good. Ilkay Gundogan's brilliant signing, but all we've talked about all season is the lack of a pivot, and so the two of them kind of go hand in hand. But yeah, it does look to be a pretty good deal for Barcelona, and yeah, if they do pull it off, credit to them, because they're certainly in need of some currently.
Yep. Yeah. Christensen, I had that too. It's a free agent signing. Terrific free transfer. So, Ori, the end of the season is practically upon us. Still a few more match reviews for me to get through. But what do you have cooking in your work, and the pieces you're putting out and things like that?
Yeah, mostly just on Football España. If you stick to the analysis section on Football España, I mean, some of the columnists we have on there are really good kind of writers on Spanish football in general. But that's where I will be sticking kind of more and more in-depth pieces as well. And yeah, if you want to follow Football España, we'll be across everything Barcelona. And yeah, we try to give you the news, give you how likely this is to be true, kind of thing, and a little bit more kind of analysis as well, and help you kind of wade through the mire that sometimes is Barcelona news.
Right, because again, if anyone just reads Marca, I don't think they're going to get exactly what they need to about Barcelona news. That's not how that works. So, and also, or the Twitter aggregators that you're using. So, yes, Football España, head there or follow Ruri on Twitter. I have that in the link in the description, the show notes. And then we're also, that being the Barcelona podcast, Twitter, Instagram, Hilton D13 for me on Twitter or X or whatever. And then Patreon, always a shout out to my Patrons, helping continue to make these shows in good times and bad. Then close Facebook group and Discord. Those are the two ways you kind of get involved with communities, and that's where I have you ask the listener questions, as we're going to have a show for that coming up in a few weeks as well. Then, of course, a good rating on the podcast app, subscribing to the YouTube channel. Those are the easiest, cheapest, and a huge help for me. So, most importantly, though, thanks so much for listening to the show. Until next time, we'll talk to you soon. Barca.